Ready.
All right. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Today is January 25th, 2021, and we are ready to begin today's meeting. As we begin, I'd like to first thank Council members Bonin and Koretz, who will not be rejoining us in the reformulated Budget and Finance Committee, but have been such an instrumental part of this committee for so many years, and in all of the work that we've done to try to bring fiscal responsibility to the city and to year in and year out provide a balanced budget and do the important work that this committee has done. I want to really express my appreciation to Mr. Bond and Mr. Koretz for their partnership over all these years. And I'm very pleased to welcome our new members of the committee, Councilmember Rodriguez and Councilmember De Leon. We're delighted to have you on the team, both of you, and both of you have many years of experience in dealing with the issues that we deal with in this committee, and it's going to be a great addition to have you both aboard. And so I just wanted to welcome you. And before we begin, if either of you would like to offer any initial comments, that's fine, or we can begin the meeting. So.
Thank you much, Mr. Chair. I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great having you.
Ready to get to work.
Terrific. Thank you. I would normally have called as consent candidates members, but I think we do have some public comment on these items, so we'll take that in a moment. But I would be offering items 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 as consent candidates. We will take public comment before we take those up, but just know that those will be my recommendations for consent approval. Obviously, if any of those are matters that any member would like to hear more about or ask questions about or has concerns about, feel free to call them special and we'll take it up. And with that, before we go to public comment, I'm going to ask Mr. Llewellyn to come on forward and make a presentation on item number 1. But as we do that, Ms. Morales, if you could please read out the information that people need in order to participate in public comment, and then we'll go to Mr. Llewellyn.
Thank you. Members of the public who would like to offer public comment on the items listed on today's agenda should call 1-669-254-5252 and use meeting ID number 160-655-3266 and then press pound. Press pound again when prompted for participant ID. Once admitted into the meeting, press star 9 to request to speak. Thank you.
Oh, you know what? I just realized we didn't establish a quorum. So before we call item number 1, let's go ahead and call the roll, please.
Thank you. Councilmember Krikorian?
Here.
Blumenfield?
Blumenfield present.
De Leon? Councilmember De Leon?
Oh, I apologize, Ms. Morales. I had it on mute. Here.
Rodriguez?
Here.
Price?
Here.
5 members present and a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Terrific. Thank you very much. So let's go ahead and call item number 1, please.
Item number 1 is an oral report by the City Administrative Officer relative to President Biden's proposed COVID relief package.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I'm going to turn this over to Patty Huber, who has been tracking our COVID funding for the city since the beginning.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Llewellyn. Welcome,
Thank
Ms.
you,
Huber.
sir.
Good afternoon. So you requested that we provide a preliminary assessment of some of the potential revenue replacement funding in President Biden's American Rescue Plan. I would like to note that this is preliminary and that the information that was available was extremely high level without a lot of detail. However, in response, there are three areas that we think, one that is directly revenue replacement, at least appears to be, and two that are related to reimbursement of COVID expenses that we believe could address potential budget shortfalls. I note this proposal is subject to congressional approval, and so it's difficult to determine if it will be approved as proposed, both in terms of the overall categories of funding and or the amounts as proposed. We don't know how quickly Congress will move, and if any limitations will be imposed above what's on paper, and more importantly, what the allocation methodology will be that will be used. There's very little detail on that. As to revenue relief, there is support for first responders and other essential workers. That's sort of the language from the proposal. It indicates that it would provide $350 billion in emergency funding to state, local, and territorial governments to keep frontline public workers on the job while also distributing vaccines, scaling testing, reopening schools, and maintaining other vital services. So it's fairly broad. I would note $3 billion of the funding is proposed to be allocated to the Economic Development Administration for grants to government entities to fund initiatives that support bottoms-up economic development and to enable good-paying jobs. So that would come off the $350. While that EDA funding is intended to provide communities with a broad range of financial needs, they are going to be on a grant basis, and it's not clear what those grant terms would be at this time. For the remaining $347 billion, there is no allocation methodology. And I would note that what we have heard, in particular from the mayor's DC legislative staff, that there was a lot of dissatisfaction with how the coronavirus relief funds were allocated, particularly among smaller jurisdictions that had to rely on the state to allocate funds downward because they didn't qualify for a direct allocation. So I think that we should expect that there would be a lot of jockeying for more direct allocations that could expand the pool of jurisdictions that get direct allocations. Although the pool against which it would be is greater. The CRF was against $150 billion. This is $350 billion. But with the lack of information on a methodology, I'm loath to say we can expect a certain amount. I would also note that the CRF was allocated on a per capita basis, i.e. the size of population. I'm not sure if that's the best methodology for allocating for a revenue problem. So again, I think that might be an area of conversation. But obviously our DC team is well aware that the city wants as much money as it can get out of this, and so would, I'm sure, be lobbying appropriately. The next area is, the next two areas are related to reimbursement of city expenses. The first of these is that the proposal calls for $30 billion to go to the Federal Disaster Relief Fund, and part of that is to provide 100% federal reimbursement for critical emergency response resources, again, to states, locals, and tribal governments. So this would increase our FEMA reimbursements to 100%. It's not explicit on whether it's retroactive or not, although given this is an ongoing event, there is the likelihood that we could be reimbursed 100% going back to March. It's just not clear, and so I would say, but it's not unreasonable. So just for an order of magnitude, as of January 19th, departments have reported a total of $336.2 in response costs. I would note this is retroactive to the beginning, so back to March, and that it's what they have reported, not what we have actually received, invoices and timesheets and all the documentation that we can validate. And occasionally when we go through that, we find some things are included that maybe don't meet the public assistance description in the way that it needs to, but it's an order of magnitude. And so at 75%, we would anticipate receiving approximately $252 million. So if we got 100%, that would be $84 million than we might otherwise expect. However, as we have indicated previously, the FEMA process is slower, and I don't believe that we can expect much of that in this given fiscal year. It would come in over the ensuing fiscal years. And so in future years could be used to restore either the reserve fund or fund critical services. Another provision which was helpful is that they are renewing provisions that employers provide paid leave until September 30th. That's the proposal. It includes that it would reimburse state and local governments for the cost of this leave, but that section had no amount tied to it. So whether it would be all of our leave or it would be a pot of money against which we could apply, I couldn't tell you. It just had a statement that it would look to reimburse for this leave. I would note that through December 5th, which is the last time we pulled this data, and this was going again back to March, for council-controlled departments, we had $52.7 million in admin leave and another $16.9 million for our proprietary departments. For both these last two categories, I would just like to note that from the CRF funds, we have applied those funds to non-FEMA reimbursable expenses, which include the city's cost share of FEMA projects, as well as admin leave for the council-controlled departments. So therefore, if these things are approved, we would have to go back and revisit the expenses, the reimbursements that we have applied to that CRF amount and adjust them accordingly as we get more data. There are some other areas in the legislation where we might get specific allocations for very specific programs like rental assistance, some homeless and public transit, but those again are going to be limited and for those activities and not available for the budget generally. And is there any other questions that you have for me?
I'm certain that there will be, Ms. Huber. I want to thank you for that report, and I think it was as thorough as it can be given the great number of unknowables that are still out there. And I think one of my objectives in having this discussion this early on was exactly to emphasize how many unknowables there are, because I'm concerned that as people read the news and see that there's proposals out there for help for local government, they may start to count that money. And it is way, way too early to even bank on there being a relief package, let alone determining how much of that relief package will be going to state and local government. And then determining how much from that portion might appropriately be allocated to cities as opposed to states and counties. And then determining what the funding formula will be, whether it's based on poverty rates or unemployment rates or per capita population assessment, or any number of other different factors that Washington may choose to apply. And then after all that, determining what it might be eligible to be spent on. In the last relief package, revenue replacement was not permissible. In this one, perhaps it will be, perhaps it won't be. So there's still a lot that we absolutely cannot count on. But I want to have this conversation at every Budget and Finance Committee meeting so that we are continuing to be as up to date as we can be on what's going on in Washington, so that hopefully this city can influence that outcome to the extent that we can. But whether we do or not, at least we know what we can count on and what we can't count on, and we can make intelligent budget decisions based on that information. So with that, I thank you very much. Members, any questions on this for Ms. Huber? Mr. Blumenfield.
Yes, thank you very much for this report. Obviously, this is would be huge if this comes through the way that President Biden has suggested it. So I'm not counting our eggs before they hatch, but these are huge eggs, and we need to do everything we can also to influence those questions that you mentioned, and make sure that we have a seat at the table to ensure that the reimbursements go down the way that we want them to. So, you talked about not even including the direct relief that you talked about, potentially 136 million just if you're adding the response costs and the paid leave. That's money that we've already spent that we could potentially be reimbursed, which is great. Now, there's some other areas of the bill that certainly have been reading about that will have a dramatic effect on us, and like the renter relief. We put in $100 million of our COVID money plus, a couple million from our discretionary accounts toward renter relief early on. If the feds, there's a large amount of money for renter relief. I think it's about $2.6 billion for the state of California potentially. If we get about 10% of that, have you done the calculations there in terms of how that would work? And we don't know, but ideally we would be able to have that money flow through our existing rental relief program as opposed to having to have it administered in some other way.
Okay, so the American Rescue Plan actually includes $30 billion in rental assistance. 25 of that is for rental relief. The rest of it is for utility relief. If we assume that it's provided to local jurisdictions similar to the exact amount that was provided in the recent Consolidated Appropriations Act, which was approved in December, it included $25 billion for rental assistance. The city received a direct allocation of that, and we got $118 million. And that has already been received. HCID has applied for it. It was received. And they are working on the report to come to council to put forward the spending plan for that, in line with the requirements of the Consolidated Appropriations Act. So assuming they use the same formula, we could get in that neighborhood from this next allocation. But again, I don't know for sure that they will stay with that allocation methodology.
Right, and that would be great. So that's two, well, you said 36 million. Wasn't there 2.6 billion in the Consolidated Act just for the state?
I don't know what was in for the state. I'm talking about there there was 25 billion for rental assistance,
Okay.
just for this one category, not the whole
And then-
appropriation side.
And do we know, or are there estimates in terms of the backlog of unpaid rent? I've heard these numbers that range from 200 million to well over, $1 billion. And
That is a question for HCID on where they are. We provided a lot and did a lot already with the coronavirus relief funds that we provided for rental assistance, but I don't have any information on sort of how much the rental backlog is in the city of Los Angeles. I just don't have that information.
okay, but obviously it's all inextricably linked. And the other big expense we didn't hear about is we're spending a lot of money on testing and vaccinations and medical facilities, things that are way outside of our lane, but that we're doing because it has to get done. How much additional money is in there for these items, or is that all just straight up Fema reimbursement?
So let me pull this up. So for vaccinations, there is 20 billion. We are not anticipating, consistent with other testing, vaccination, I think mostly testing money to date, none of that has flowed directly to the city in any way. It has gone to public health agencies, so we would continue to expect those funds to go to the state and county public health agencies and not to the city. And again, there's not a lot of information, but I'm just going consistent with past actions. There is 20 billion for vaccinations. Let me see, another 50 billion for the expansion of testing. I'm sorry, that's what I can see very quickly. I didn't write these. I'm just looking at the summary sheet I have real quickly. But again, I don't believe that we would expect the city to see any of those funds directly.
Right, which obviously this is a question we have to grapple with, which is how we prioritize our spending, given that if somebody else can get it 100% reimbursed, we need to figure that out to do it the most effective way for our people and to get it done and cost effectively for us as well. Now, in terms of, none of this money is, I mean, we still face a $675 million deficit.
That's what we are is what we were projecting as the second FSR due to revenue shortfalls, the Public Works Trust Fund loan we have to repay. So yes, we are still expecting a significant deficit in the current year. I would note that was really our estimates before this most recent surge and of the coronavirus, because that was back in early December. And so it with the slower rollout of the vaccination program, hard to know how it will continue to be impacted or whether it will get worse, but we are monitoring those numbers.
Right, and then I guess at some point we have to figure out if we're going to solve some of our budget crisis for this fiscal year with this money that's coming in at the end of this year or next year, whether we look into financing mechanisms to do so.
We discussed the possibility of needing to go to the market for working capital to complete this fiscal year.
That's another question, but I'll stop right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. De Leon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Huber, I want to go back to the memoranda, the executive order put forth by the president. Obviously, he invoked the Stafford Act that gives him more extraordinary powers in terms of moving dollars. The memoranda from the president with regards to 100% reimbursement for non-congregate shelters, given the epic crisis that we're living today in the city of LA with regards to our homeless population, our homeless community. Do you have any details, any more specific details, Ms. Huber, about the 100% reimbursable rate? And given structurally where we're at, economically, in terms of our budget, cash flow, the key word here is reimbursement. Mm-hmm. So do we even have cash, or are we going to be creative and innovative enough to figure out how to find that cash to do what we need to do for the temporary non-congregate shelters so we can get that reimbursement from the federal government?
So regarding the 100%, I am aware of the memo that the president issued, I believe, sometime on Friday of last week. Our understanding is that, first of all, his memo spoke to some very key areas, and including non-congregate shelters, separate from the American Rescue Plan, which appears to be more broad in applying that 100% reimbursement rate. But it is our understanding that there needs to be some congressional action to actually go to that 100%. So I checked with my FEMA expert today, and she believes that Congress has to work on that.
So it requires...
And I recall when President Trump announced he was going to do 100% reimbursement, there was all of the conversation. He doesn't have that unilateral authority to just go to 100%. 90% is doable under the Stafford Act, is our understanding, and 100% would require congressional action.
Okay. So it would require a congressional vote to get the 100%, like you said, to vote the Stafford Act.
That is what I understand, yes.
Okay. And so if we're going to get the 100%, obviously this may take a little longer if we're successful with the congressional vote and both the bicameral legislative chambers. Let me ask you the question, and if you don't have the answer, it's okay. Maybe we can get it a little later from our CAO, Rich Llewellyn, and Sharon Toy of the CLA. Cash flow issues, because to get reimbursed, obviously, we need to have cash up front to make the investment to get the reimbursement. Are we in that position where we can take advantage of potentially the 100% reimbursable rate or the 90%, whatever the final outcome is, with regards to the non-congregate shelters?
So, to date, the city has been cash flowing all of its activities from either departmental appropriations.
We've been moving things around,
from department appropriations, from people who are working on those projects. For example, in our project Room Key, many of the people who are working are disaster service workers who are working on their own time. They're being assigned to do that work, and they do it for their regular day, and in some cases on overtime. As a reminder, FEMA does not reimburse for straight time, period. They only reimburse for what they define extraordinary costs, which is overtime and expenses incurred in the response. So our disaster service workers who are maybe working at a Project Room Key location, the city is paying that from the amounts that we budgeted to pay them anyway. And instead of doing their regular job, they are doing Project Room Key disaster service work. To the extent that there is overtime, that is what we associated with that, and for some of them there is. These are 24-hour locations. We have people working night shifts and so on. They may be earning overtime. that money we would claim from FEMA. Okay, to the extent that we're providing any personal protective equipment for them to do their job and have made those purchases, those expenses we would submit to FEMA for reimbursement. But again, we're cash flowing that. As you are newer to our situation, we did cash flow some of that by taking a loan in the current year. We had a loan last fiscal year, which we have repaid. But in the current fiscal year, we have a $75 million loan taken from our Public Works Trust Fund. And that was transferred to what the mayor's office created and mayor and council in the general city purpose budget, a COVID-19 emergency response fund. And departments submit a request to us and to the mayor's office, and then we will transfer money from that to them for various purchases. It's mostly going for expenses, various expenses, like personal protective equipment or the leases of equipment at test sites, because we had to lease things like porta potties and other things, and so fencing and so on. And so we do provide some cash flow money that way to departments.
So Ms. Huber, basically the departments submit their invoices to get reimbursed. But my question is a little more narrow than that.
Yes.
My question is very specific, and like I said, if we don't have the answer to the question, that's okay. We can get it, a little later. We can get it offline. Are we in a position, cash flow, to take advantage of, if it's a congressional act, 100% of reimbursements for non-congregate shelter? That's my question. It's very simple and narrow in scope. Like I said, if you don't have the answer to that question, that's okay. We'll get it in the next few days or next week or so. Are we in that situation or not?
I have to say, I think I'm maybe not exactly understanding your question. Are you asking, are we in a position to potentially borrow against future FEMA reimbursement?
Either borrow or be creative with the various departments' funds that we have to make the investments on the shelters that we need given our homeless crisis.
I think I don't have the full detailed answer for that now. We're cash flowing them now using all the variety of funds available to us. And as indicated in our second FSR, just for working capital, we are talking about potentially needing to go and borrow. But that is not specific to saying borrowing against this future revenue source.
Okay. And what we can do, Ms. Huber, is I'll follow, with you and Mr. Llewellyn. One other thing too is maybe I just want to plant this seed here. Again, no need for an answer specifically, but just plant the seed. If we take advantage of the 100% reimbursable rate for non-congregate shelters, what options do we have to make the investments in terms of the Operation Room Key or Operation Home Key? And when I say by Home Key, would we be in a position where we would secure the resources for vouchers as opposed to perhaps with Operation Home Key, that we could actually make a physical acquisition of a distressed asset that we would have in our own possession, taking advantage of the 100%, even though if it's not dollar for dollar, perhaps on a pro rata basis, we can secure a physical distressed asset and convert that eventually over the course of time to permanent housing. So maybe, and hopefully Mr. Llewellyn is listening to just plant that seed right there. And again, we can have that discussion, offline. I just want to think creatively how we can take advantage of any dollars that come our way and how we can leverage it to the best of our ability, even if it's a pro rata to provide shelter eventually, which becomes permanent for our unhoused community members. One other thing too is Mr. Blumenfield talked about the 2.6 billion pass through from the feds to the state. Governor Democracy announced today $2.6 billion to be distributed in equitable fashion throughout the state of California. Do we know how much of that 2.6 billion will actually be coming down to Los Angeles?
I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay, no, that's okay. I know it's all brand new. It's all just fresh. It's just off the presses right now.
Yes, and so I don't have the details on that. I couldn't tell you relative to your question on the FEMA reimbursement and sort of setting it aside for homeless acquisitions or vouchers or so on. The one thing I can tell you is the American Rescue Plan does have $5 billion in it as proposed. Again, I don't know what they'll do with it. That would go to state and locals for homeless and those at risk for homelessness. And it provides for both congregate and non-congregate housing, purchase of hotels and motels, to be converted to permanent housing, and funds to homeless service providers for, the hiring and retention of staff and maintenance of outreach programs and so on. But again, there's no detail on how that money would be allocated. It just has a stated goal of assisting 200,000 individuals and families to obtain stable housing. So that is a component of the President's proposed rescue plan, and we will again just have to continue monitoring to see what does and does not make it into the final plan.
Okay, no, I appreciate it, Ms. Huber. I know it's very difficult to sort of kind of based on conjecture extrapolate, points when it's sort of kind of bullets and broad points, but I appreciate it nonetheless, Ms. Huber. And then we'll continue the conversations offline. Thank you very much.
All right. Ms. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Gotcha, Mr. Perez. Go ahead.
Thank you, Patty, so much for that overview. I know it's still very preliminary, so there's a lot of moving parts. So, but it lends us, it provides a little bit of optimism of what might be coming down the road. And I think our responsibility is to still operate as if it's not coming, for the purposes of our planning and to being prudent with respect to this budget. The only question I had, and if you have the answer, great. If not, and it touched a little bit on a question that Mr. Blumenfield had. But aside from the fire department's administration in terms of its activities for both testing and now vaccination distribution, those are exclusively FEMA, as far as I know, costs associated with FEMA reimbursement. We haven't incurred as a city, to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, the county has absorbed the cost with the administration of the vaccine outside, separate and apart from whatever we've done to lending our staffing of the fire department for the purposes of administration of the vaccine.
So I've had some preliminary conversations with the mayor's office. So some of the city test sites, and I am waiting for details on this, the fire department is operating them, and they are vaccination sites, city vaccination sites, separate from the county ones. I believe this includes Dodger Stadium, but I'm not 100% positive. But the mayor's office has been working with a provider to actually take over the operation of those vaccination, at least, I don't even know if it's a site or sites. I don't have a lot of detail. I was talking with them last week about this. Fire department would only be doing this while the provider staffs up. And the provider is looking to provide the city some reimbursement from the funds it receives from insurance companies to pay as reimbursement for the vaccine, because they don't charge, a a resident is not charged. It's not even charged a copay, but the insurance companies are actually paying for the vaccine. So again, this is something that just came up in the past week or so with the mayor's office as they were talking about how this would work as they talk with this service provider. But again, they were looking at only a few weeks of the fire department providing staff on an overtime basis. But if we get reimbursed by the provider, we can't be reimbursed by FEMA. Even though we could claim vaccination expenses as an allowable FEMA activity, we can't be paid twice for the same activity. But it's also not clear that the insurance proceeds would be sufficient to cover the costs of our employees. That's part of what I understand. But again, I am waiting for a budget to come from the mayor's office to kind of give me a sense of what they're talking about, and I have not seen that yet.
But just to be clear, but we are not paying for the vaccine, or are we paying for the vaccine itself?
No, we're not. And while early on we were actually paying for test kits at the city-run test sites, as of the summer, our contractor there is essentially fronting all of the costs of the test kit itself, and we stopped paying for those. The costs that we are incurring at test sites right now are really the city staff that we provide to manage and control traffic and, you know, have people test kits and send test kits off. But the kits themselves, we are not paying for.
Got it. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Mr. Price.
And thank you for this discussion we've had today. Patricia, very informative. Thank you for your role in keeping us on track and making sure we can collect as much as we can. I got a question on the rental assistance piece again. This is really a reimbursement to the property owners, correct? Is that how that's going to work again this year? Or the next round, I should say? If the property owner gets reimbursed?
I believe, and I don't have it in front of me, but from the Consolidated Appropriations Act, if my memory is correct, it would go to the property owner unless they decline, in which case then it could go to the renter. But HCID would need to confirm that. I'm sorry, I did not put those details directly in front of me.
That's okay.
I should have.
I'm just curious, you know, the rental assistance relief is going to be a big issue whenever it comes through. And so I know the state has taken some steps. Now, is the state proposing some dollars for rental assistance also? Isn't the governor proposing something in his budget?
I believe that he did, but I don't have those details in front of me. And again, the 118 that I mentioned is the funds that came directly to the city from the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And again, HCID is in the process of a transmittal to council to establish that program with those funds. They did not give me a specific timeline, but I do know that they are working to get that out ASAP, given the need to continue providing rental assistance.
Great. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Mr. Blumenfield, anything else? Oh, you're muted.
Well, just a quick follow-up on something Mr. De Leon mentioned about the hotel reimbursements. You'd mentioned that there's money in this there's about $5 billion for that overall, but is that an expense that is reimbursable, acquiring hotels at this point in time, and that kind of
So I believe most of the acquisitions that we have been doing have been with the state funds. I do not know that that's FEMA reimbursable. The operations of our project Room Key, where we have been putting people in hotels and paying for them to stay in hotels, that's non-congregate sheltering, and that is reimbursable. I don't know that the actual procurement of hotels for shelter and so on is. I just, honestly, nobody asked me that before, and I don't know the answer.
Okay, because I think that's kind of where Mr. De Leon was going. I thought it was a great point, which if it turns out, and I didn't think it was, I thought it was mostly what you were saying with the operations. But
I believe it's the operations.
If we can acquire hotels with FEMA reimbursement money, and that's 100% reimbursable, if that is the case, then we should be going hog wild on that and figuring out how to finance it and use this opportunity to acquire as many non-congregate shelters as we can. So I would love to get the answer that he was asking in terms of whether or not that acquisition piece is reimbursable. Because if it is, that opens up a huge door for us to kick wide and really make a big difference on.
I'm going to have to go back and verify, but I would say on my gut instinct it is not, because generally speaking, FEMA is looking to deal with things in the short term, just in the immediate response and recovery. And I don't know that acquisition for long-term sheltering purposes is something they would consider reimbursable. To be clear, the $5 billion number that I mentioned was not related to FEMA. It was related to the proposed American Rescue Plan that would provide additional funds.
Right. I got that.
FEMA would not reimburse for that. We don't get paid from the feds twice. Just if we got some of that, it would just be some money we could spend.
I got that. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. De Leon.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize just very quickly, and I thank you very much, Ms. Huber. When you go back, you sort of kind of make that assessment, and you're probably right. The physical acquisition through emergency short-term funding from FEMA probably will not be eligible, but to the point, I think that perhaps the members of this budget committee, through our chair, Mr. Krikorian, who have pre-existing relationships with members of Congress, we can engage them also to, who knows, maybe we can get some flexibility, where flexibility and creativity is needed, because if we can maximize the value of the dollar and stretch it, and to the point again that Mr. Blumenfield was making, and to underscore his point, instead of just paying for vouchers, because that's short term, and that money evaporates and disappears. That if we could use the dollars to make the actual physical acquisition that's neither here nor there, which I understand, if we can't do it, but it's just so much smarter, because we actually own physical possession, and then we can convert it into permanent, But this is something that, Ms. Huber, if you could do us the favor with Mr. Llewellyn and find out if so, and if it's validated that we can't, then maybe a few of us can have a creative conversation to see how we can, especially because our mayor has such a close relationship with our current president. So just a commentary, that's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. De Leon, and thank you, members. This is exactly the kind of conversation I was hoping that we were going to have, and we will continue to have at every Budget and Finance Committee meeting, because to your point, Mr. De Leon, this is the nuances of what comes out of Washington in this relief package are so vitally important to the city's financial health over the next couple of years that it's just going to be imperative that this committee is on top of every detail, and that we're exercising our influence wherever we can, and not just entrusting this to the city's representatives in Washington, but rather that we're taking that task on ourselves. So all points well taken. I appreciate the questions and the dialogue. Ms. Huber, thank you very much. We'll continue this dialogue as we move forward at each and every meeting. So thank you for being on top of it.
Okay.
So members, next I'd like to go to public comment. And Ms. Morales, if you could once again recite the call-in and comment information for folks, and then we'll go ahead and tee that up.
Yes, sir. Those wanting to offer public comment at today's meeting should call 1-669-254-5252 and use meeting ID number 160-655-3266 and then press pound. Press pound again when prompted for participant ID. Once admitted into the meeting, press star 9 to request to speak.
And this will be the time that we'll be taking comment on all agenda items. We'll be providing 2 minutes for agenda items and 1 minute for general public comment. And we can go ahead and begin with that with our first speaker now.
Good afternoon. We do not have anyone in the queue right now.
Wow, that may be a first. I don't think that has ever happened. In fact, I'm almost in disbelief that could be the case. But we will go ahead then and close public comment on all items, and we'll close general public comment. Now, do we need to note and file or receive and file the verbal report, or is it sufficient that we just have a verbal report and continue this discussion at our next meeting?
Correct. We can just continue, no action taken.
Very good. All right, members, then let's go ahead and go back to the items that I had proposed for consent approval. And I'll read that. Sorry, my computer's a little slow to respond today. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so the recommendations for consent are on item number 2, to note and file the CAO report. On item number 3, to approve the CAO's recommendations. Item number 5, to approve the ordinance. On item number 6, to approve the city attorney's recommendations. Item number 7, to approve the city attorney's recommendations. Item number 8, to approve the city attorney's recommendations. Item number 9, to approve the Office of Finance recommendations. And item number 10, to approve the motion. And item number 11, to approve the motion. Do any members have any comments, questions, anything that you'd like to call special among those items, or can we take them on consent? All right, if I see no objections, so let's go ahead and call the roll on those recommendations as consent items.
Thank you. If I may, Mr. Chair, for item 8, I'll have to read the recommendation into open session since it was not in the open session report. It is to authorize the city attorney to enter into contract.
I'm sorry. We have, I think, a few open mics, so anybody who doesn't need to have an open mic, please go ahead and close your mic so that we can hear that clearly. I'm sorry. Start again, Ms. Morales.
Thank you. Authorize the city attorney to enter into a contract beginning August 2017 with Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe, LLP, as bond counsel to the City of Los Angeles in connection with the formation of the City of Los Angeles Community Facilities District Number 10, now abandoned, and Community Facilities District Number 11, Ponte Vista, and with the contemplated bond issuance of $30 million for Community Facilities District Number 11. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that clarification, let's go ahead and call the roll on the consent items.
Krikorian.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
De Leon.
Aye.
Rodriguez. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Aye.
Price. Councilmember Price.
I'm coming. Aye.
Thank you.
Thank
5
you.
ayes. These items are approved as stated.
Very good. Thank you very much. So that will bring us next to item number 4.
Item number 4 is the City Administrative Officer reports relative to the COVID-19 Emergency Response Account General City Purposes Fund status report for the weeks ending November 20th, 2020 through January 15th, 2021.
Good afternoon, council members. This is Samantha Drew with the Office of the City Administrative Officer.
Good afternoon.
So before the committee are weekly status reports covering approved expenditures from the COVID-19 Emergency Response Fund that Patty described earlier. These reports cover the period November 16, 2020 through January 15, 2021. As of January 15, 2021, the remaining balance is $9.4 million. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question on the at the bottom of the page, expense related to the convention center, medical surge, leasing payments. I was curious. So that's the just for the lease of the building. Is that for other activities, services going on in conjunction with the medical setup, or what is that exactly?
Are you referring to the 2.3 million or 2.
Yes, 2.3.
Okay, yeah. So that was purely just for the lease agreement with the convention center to use that location as a medical surge facility. That has since ended as of August 15, 2020.
But that was a quarterly amount? I'm just curious. That was November through January?
No. Samantha, this is Patty, and I'll take that one. Actually, that lease amount was from basically March through August. We were just having to work out a way to actually pay that lease. And in looking at the expenditures from the COVID emergency fund, the mayor's office wanted to make sure we got a little further along before they decided to take that much from the fund to pay this. But we wanted that payment to occur so that we could finalize and submit that project to FEMA for reimbursement. And we can only be reimbursed for costs we have incurred that we've paid. So we needed the bill to be paid so that we could then submit that full project to FEMA. So that's
100% reimbursement.
At this point, we can only assume 75.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Members, any other questions on this item? Okay. I had just a couple. There's an expenditure for Angelino program regarding COVID-related financial services, and another one for antigen test pilot. Can you explain what those expenditures represent?
So the antigen test pilot was actually an initiative with, I believe, the county and USC to look into the antigen rapid test results. I don't have the exact specifics, but I can get that to you. Same with the Angelino program. This was a transfer to basically to allow the Angelino card program to, or allow residents to to utilize the Angelino card, which allowed them to generally create an account that they can make transactions through. I'm sorry if that's a little confusing, but I can send you the specific details as well.
Okay. Yes, that would be great. I'd appreciate that. Any other questions on this item, members? Okay, if there's none, the recommendation is to note and file the report. And I'm sorry, because we're audio only, we do have to call the roll on even on note and file, right?
Yes, we have been doing so.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that then if there's no objection. No other questions? Okay, let's go ahead and call the roll on noting and filing the report.
Krikorian.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
De Leon.
Aye.
Rodriguez.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
5 ayes. These items will be noted and filed.
Thank you very much. Is there any other business before the committee?
The desk is clear.
Very good. Well, Mr. De Leon and Ms. Rodriguez, it appears that you have brought us a new level of efficiency and effectiveness because we have finished our agenda and we're ready to adjourn. So thank you all very much. If there's no objection, the committee stands in adjournment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Take care, everybody.